A 15-year-old was forced on a nationwide road trip with her obsessed teacher, and for the next 38 days, FBI led a manhunt for this abducted student. Elizabeth Thomas would survive over a month of torture, but prior to that had been enduring an inappropriate relationship full of grooming, manipulation, and criminal acts against her. All while this 50-year-old man led a double life with a wife and 2 daughters of his own. Were the other teachers aware of this relationship occurring within the school building? If so, did they do enough to stop it? You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, and this case has recently been made into a Lifetime movie called Abducted by My Teacher from producer Elizabeth Smart, who is a kidnapping survivor herself. So I highly recommend watching it, but I'm going to be going over the true story behind it and all of the details of the 38-day kidnapping. So it was 2017 in Tennessee, and Elizabeth Thomas was 15 years old. She was living in Maury County with her family, who was her 48-year-old mother named Kimberly, her father Anthony, and then her 17-year-old sister Sarah. Now we know her sister Sarah's name, however, she did have 9 siblings. There were 10 kids in total, but not all were named, and so we just know that she had a ton of siblings, and one of them was named Sarah. Now Elizabeth was known to be that kind of person who was just sure of herself. She was the life of the party, but she was also extremely responsible and mature due to her family life. She attended the Culleoka Unit School after being homeschooled for much of her life. You see, at this point, she was having a very big life change, and she had not had the best home life growing up. She was allegedly abused by her mother, Kimberly, before DCF got involved in November of 2015 and separated the mother from her children. Kimberly had actually been charged with 5 counts of child abuse and neglect. Kimberly was accused of forcing the children to strip in front of each other, and then she allegedly threw one of the kids down the basement and locked the door. She once banged one of their heads into a washing machine, and their mother allegedly denied the allegations against her and would be released on $3,000 bail on the condition that she would stay away from her children. Now, their father Anthony was married to Kimberly at the time, denied knowing anything about these allegations or how bad it was at home. He was working long hours in pest control and was normally not there, and so after a while he did regain custody of his children, but due to his work schedule he was unable to homeschool, so these children would have to start going to public school. So at this time, Elizabeth was attending public school, or any school at all, for the very first time. Everything was new to her, so when a teacher began to help her with this transition, life became much easier. Now this was her health science teacher, Mr. Cummins, and Elizabeth was in his class, and Mr. Cummins was this adult that she could lean on for support, who was helping her to make friends, helping her to thrive in this new environment, and so she really appreciated this adult. Mr. Cummins was a 50-year-old man who was married for 30 years to a woman named Jill, and his first name was Tad. He also had 2 daughters himself who knew him to be everyone's friend and someone who was always mentoring other people. So this wasn't strange that their father would actually be helping this new girl who was having trouble making friends. And eventually, Mr. Cummins introduced Elizabeth to his family because they wanted to help her further. They were taking her to church, and the couple was said to accept Elizabeth into their family as though she was this 3rd daughter. At least that is how his wife Jill felt. The disturbing truth was that this was not a father-daughter relationship to Mr. Cummings. You see, on February 6th of 2017, Mr. Cummings would be suspended from the school where he taught. Now this was actually due to allegations against him involving being inappropriate with a student. Mr. Cummings was denying this, and those who knew him really just could not believe that he was capable of doing something like this, though due to these allegations involving a minor, this was reported to police, who had to investigate, and so there had to be a suspension for this investigation. But after questioning Mr. Cummings and this student, investigators were said not to be very convinced that they were telling the truth. His suspension actually directly resulted from a no contact order that he was supposed to have with this student that he broke. They even took the student out of his class. They said, do not under any circumstances be near this student at all, and yet they continued to spend time together. On February 3rd, another teacher had seen the student in his room, and that's why 3 days later he was suspended without pay. Now, the officer who questioned Mr. Cummins and the student said that he got the impression that both of them were lying, though no arrests were made at this time. Though on March 13th of 2017, Mr. Cummins would leave behind his wife and his children, and nobody knew where he had gone. When police questioned Mr. Cummins' wife, Jill, she said that he had started acting strange, and it was though he was not going to be there anymore. In fact, he was teaching her how to make their coffee that he made every night before they went to bed so she could have it in the morning. And she asked him, "Why are you telling me this?" And he said he was going out of town for a job interview. Now, this was the night before he vanished, and so she woke up that morning, and Jill found that not only was her husband missing, $4,500 was missing, as well as both of his guns, and a note saying that he was either going to Virginia Beach or DC just to clear his mind of all of this crap. Now, he said in the note not to call the police because they would think that he ran because he was guilty, and he wasn't. It was also found that he filled prescriptions that he had for erectile dysfunction drug. Now, with phone records, which showed calls and texts that confirmed communication between Mr. Cummins and the student outside of school, it was found that the student was also the one that Mr. Cummins described as another daughter, Elizabeth Thomas. Investigators were not shocked at all when they went to talk to Elizabeth and found that she was missing as well, and her sister ended up saying that she had left that morning with bags, and she actually told her sister Sarah before she left if she was not home by 6 p.m. that night to call the police. Now, their residence actually did have surveillance cameras, and so they obtained this footage, and they did see Elizabeth leaving with bags in hand that morning. Elizabeth's father, Anthony, was then spoken to, and he claimed that honestly he wasn't home to know much about any of this. But he also didn't know the fact that Elizabeth had told those close to her that she loved Mr. Cummins. Elizabeth's sister Sarah went to the same school that Elizabeth did, so she knew Mr. Cummins, and she would actually go and eat lunch in Mr. Cummins' classroom with her sister. And Sarah actually called this teacher a weirdo, and she had allegedly heard other students at one point teasing Elizabeth about kissing her teacher. And when they were saying this, Elizabeth ended up saying that they needed to leave. Unfortunately, too many teens see this sort of behavior from a teacher and they think it's exciting and it's attractive rather than the crime it is, and that's exactly what happened here. Elizabeth's father would later hear that Mr. Cummins once went to Elizabeth's work, and Elizabeth actually hid in the back and asked a coworker to tell him she wasn't there. Now, surveillance footage was taken from around the community where Elizabeth and Mr. Cummins lived, and that is when they found at a Shoney's restaurant in Columbia, Tennessee, that Elizabeth was dropped off there around 7:30 a.m. to 7:45 a.m., and nearby at a Shell gas station an hour later, Mr. Cummins was seen getting out of his Nissan Rogue, which was actually his wife's, for gas. Now, her family had immediately reported her missing when they realized what was going on, and as 6 p.m. came and went, and that's when Elizabeth told her sister to watch out for her coming home or call the police, she never returned home. Around midnight, her name was entered into the National Crime Information Center, and at 4 a.m. an endangered child alert was issued. But by 5 a.m., not many tips had come in with sightings, even though an arrest warrant had also been issued for Mr. Cummins for sexual contact with a minor. And then by 5:53 a.m., a multi-state Amber Alert was issued, and that is when the manhunt became nationwide. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation found a troubling pattern of behavior by Tad Cummins, suggesting that he had been abusing his role as a teacher to groom this young girl for some time now. And the Amber Alert described Elizabeth as a girl with blonde hair, hazel eyes, standing at 5'5" and 120 pounds. She was last seen in a flannel shirt and black leggings. And Tad Cummins was described as a white male standing at 6 foot and 200 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. The car he believed to be driving was a silver Nissan Rogue with the tag 976ZPT. It was stressed at this time that there was nothing consensual about this. It was not a romance, but a serious crime. Investigators began to wonder if Elizabeth had meant 6 p.m. that night or 6 a.m. the next morning, though she did not return at 6 a.m. either, nor 6 p.m. that day, 24 hours later. And with investigators' belief that this teacher had abducted his student, the FBI were alerted of the case. And the phones were traced, neither could be located. Abducted, the case was quickly spreading throughout the United States. And due to this, a young woman from around the same area would come forward saying that she was Mr. Cummings' student a few years prior, and that he had pursued her in the same way.
It was just me and Tad. We were in the music room. It was right next to his classroom. And I had learned a new song on the piano, and I was going to go show him. But he sat down first and played that song, and I started recording a little bit in.
When asked if she felt the song was for her, Paris said she didn't assume, but looking back, things seemed different.
So at this point, the Maury County Public School was under fire, and they released a statement saying that since the allegations, their teacher was dismissed for investigation, and the district doesn't tolerate any manner of behavior that is, alleged in this incident. Basically covering their own, saying that they had done everything that they could. And so at this point, more tips were coming in, and that is when there was a sighting in a Walmart in Oklahoma City on March 15th. And when investigators obtained their surveillance footage, they would catch Tad Cummins walking through the store with his 15-year-old girl as they bought food. It appeared that Tad had darker hair and Elizabeth looked to have reddish hair. They were long gone by the time this footage was actually seen, but investigators had also found by this time that Tad had purchased a secure title loan for a personal vehicle and personal effects a few days before the abduction, as well as doing online research to make sure that his car could not be tracked by law enforcement, and he also was researching teen marriage. He had also purchased the hair dye that they had used. The investigators began to believe that he had planned this long before, and he was added to Tennessee's top 10 most wanted list. There were very few tips coming in, even though it was from all over America. So investigators began to believe that he was hiding from the general public. Maybe they were hiding out in an isolated area or in their car. So property owners were asked to search their grounds. Camping grounds as well as isolated areas were searched. And a new picture was actually obtained and then released to the public of Mr. Cummings and Elizabeth together at school just days before they had vanished. It had been over a month and no one knew what this 15-year-old Elizabeth was going through with her teacher. Elizabeth's family was making public statements begging her to come home.
Worried about seeing her return safely. Mr. Cummins to leave her someplace safe. I know you don't have the guts to face the music, so you need to leave her somewhere safe and make arrangements for her to be picked up. Doing the best we can.
Are you still holding out hope that that's going to happen?
Yes, it's all we've got.
And Tad's family was making pleas for him to come forward, and his daughter said that they wanted him to know that he could come home because he wasn't coming home to nothing. They were still there.
Let me speak directly to my husband. Tad, this is not you. This is not who you are. We can help you get through this. No matter how far you've gone or what's happening right now, God's grace is sufficient for you, and He wants you to come home. Your family wants their Poppy back. Please do the right thing and turn yourself into the police and bring Beth home.
Then on April 20th of 2017, 38 days since Elizabeth was abducted, SWAT was sent a tip and found the Nissan Rogue parked outside of a remote cabin 2,000 miles away from where they lived. Tad Cummins was arrested without incident, and Elizabeth was rescued. She had survived.
We received a call to the 1-800-TBI-FIND tip line around 11 o'clock Central last night from an individual in California who indicated he may have encountered Tad Cummins and Elizabeth Thomas, the subjects of an ongoing Amber Alert that's been in place here in the state of Tennessee for the better part of 6 weeks. We contacted the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office in California and learned that they had received the very same information from the very same individual. The area where the pair was reported to be is a very remote, isolated area with no or limited cell phone service. Authorities in Siskiyou County kept this car under surveillance for several hours, and as daylight broke this morning, they were able to take Tad Cummins into custody and safely recover Elizabeth without incident.
At this time, all we know is that she's apparently healthy and unharmed. It will be, of course, our knowing that, our main concern is how is she emotionally and mentally. And we're going to see to it that not only do we look at her as a potential witness and a victim in this case, but also as someone that if she needs help, whatever help we can offer, we will make sure that's provided for her.
She's 15 years old. She's a young girl that's with a grown man that's 50 years old. So he needs to be held accountable for kidnapping this girl.
Now, Tad was held in custody without bond, awaiting extradition, and the owner of the cabin was actually coming forward to investigators to say that Tad had come to him and said that they needed help finding work and a place to stay because they had lost their home in a fire, and that the girl with him was his daughter. But he noticed that this daughter avoided eye contact with him.
Pretty high up in the mountains here in Northern California in Siskiyou County. I want to bring you inside of this cabin. Now, the owner of the cabin says, look, this was being built, so there's no electricity. There's sort of nothing in here. This is the bare bones, and what you see are places like where they were cooking. So there's a grill here with a little gas canister, and there are some rice. The FBI was in here for much of the day today, and the sheriff's department the day before. But what we also see here is paperwork from the authorities, this one saying it's a search and seizure warrant. There's also a long list of things that were taken out, including coconut oil and KY jelly.
Tad's wife immediately filed for divorce, and Tad was officially fired from his teaching job. But the Thomas attorney made a statement claiming that Elizabeth had been reunited with her family, but that there was no doubt she suffered severe emotional trauma and that the process of her recovery is only beginning. Her father was saying she had lost so much weight and that she is getting help from a trauma team at this point. Her older brother said that he was relieved that she wasn't physically broken, but at the same time he worried about how far Tad had sunk his teeth into her mentally. And her father was saying that sometimes since being back she was this happy girl laughing just like herself, but then sometimes she was in a fetal position and crying, and he believed that his daughter had been brainwashed. Now, Elizabeth's father, Anthony, then filed for divorce from his wife, Kimberly, who was the one charged back in 2015 but had not been with the family during that time, and he also filed a new restraining order against her, which was granted. Court orders were also submitted to prevent Kimberly from speaking out about Elizabeth when this all happened. But the girl who survived, Elizabeth Thomas, would tell more about what she endured, what she actually went through, what her situation was like, and how this occurred. She would admit that she could feel this relationship with her teacher who was supporting her becoming uncomfortable.
They think they know what happened. They think that I like old men, and that's not the case. He made me feel like I didn't have anyone else and no one really cared about me like he did. I was feeling real low, and I was wanting to get on antidepressants and try to go to a therapist, and he told me no and not to do it because it'd change who I was.
So he convinced you not to get help?
Yes.
What did he suggest you do instead?
Come to him. Like, I didn't want anyone to really know. I was scared of what would happen if anyone did know. I didn't want to make him mad or make him want to come after me or anything like that.
She could feel him staring at her during class. Then their conversations moved to social media, where through Instagram, Mr. Cummins was contacting Elizabeth outside of school, and then the messages turned sexually explicit. And this relationship that was already inappropriate then became the two posting about each other through their actual Instagram posts. And, you know, Mr. Cummins had posted a quote that said, "It was love at first sight, at last sight, at ever and ever sight." And then she posted, "I look forward to going to school just to see you." Elizabeth explained that Mr. Cummins once told her that she would look nice naked, and this was in the very beginning of knowing each other, and the sexually suggestive statements continued, and that's when Elizabeth began to realize that this was very inappropriate. But it wasn't until one day after school, when the two were alone and they were walking towards the double doors to leave the school, that she knew that it had gone too far, because that is when Mr. Cummins grabbed her face and kissed her. She was in shock, but more due to the fact that she had never had a boyfriend. So this kiss was quite a lot for her, for this innocent 15-year-old. Elizabeth knew in the back of her mind that this was wrong, but the problem was she didn't want to make her teacher angry, nor did she want the attention that she feared would happen if she spoke out. She said that this teacher began to use her grades to manipulate her, saying that she would never be able to attend college or pursue a career after that if anybody knew about this relationship, if it ended. But thankfully, a student had had seen this kiss, and in January of 2017, they took that to school officials and told them what they had seen. So Elizabeth said that Mr. Cummins eventually began to say that she was going to run away with him, and Elizabeth believed that he would do something drastic if she didn't, because he kept saying that without her, he would take his own life. So when she got into the car that day of the abduction, she was shown his gun, and she knew at that point she couldn't escape even if she wanted to. Then she said that Mr. Cummins destroyed both of their phones by throwing them over a bridge as they drove, and Elizabeth said that they kept traveling, moving from state to state. However, the most horrific part was that Elizabeth claimed her and her teacher were having sex every day. She was being sexually assaulted by her teacher, an adult who had earned her trust by grooming her and then holding her captive.
I know he's a bad man, and I blame myself a lot, but now I know that he's at fault. He himself made him do it. Other people don't choose your actions, you do.
He began to tell her that he would hurt her family if she didn't stay with him. And so that is when she just went along with whatever he was saying and forced her to pose as a married couple with him. They were John and Joanne Castro. They were 24 and 40. However, Mr. Cummins did give Elizabeth a motive for all of this, and he began to tell her that he believed that the devil made him commit all of these crimes. Eventually, they stopped at a commune in California, but they were kicked out because people began to get very suspicious of this strange father-daughter relationship that was going on, and so they ended up telling him to get out. But they eventually made their way to a remote cabin in Cecilville, California. Thankfully, though, a neighbor with a watchful eye ended up noticing that their car placed there didn't have a license plate, and when he saw the young girl, he ended up calling the police. And that is how these two were found and how Elizabeth Thomas survived. But Tad Cummins initially pled not guilty, and during the interrogation from the FBI, he was shaking, he was shivering, and he was about to cry when asked what happened.
There has not been any kind of a physical relationship kind of thing at all.
Right. And my thing would
I've been married for 31 years, and I've never touched another one.
Right.
And I'm not joking with you guys when I say that.
Right.
I've never touched another woman.
Right.
And honestly, and I ain't done anything.
Right.
I ain't done nothing wrong, but I came in here not knowing if I was going to jail. Right. I'm more afraid than I've ever been in my life.
Eventually, though, he would admit to sexual contact with Elizabeth, and he pled guilty to transporting a minor across state lines for the purpose of engaging in criminal sexual conduct and obstruction of justice. A letter from Tad to his ex-wife had a confession, and he had wrote, "I'm the one to blame for everything. The devil was deeply involved." Jill said that he had tried to apologize to her and told her that he loved her, but she would not say it back. But he did admit what he had done to Elizabeth to Jill. Now, the problem with Tennessee law is that for a kidnapping charge of a child over the age of 12, there has to be what is deemed to be force. And it states that a child at that age could just leave home at that time, and no one knew how this would actually affect the trial and the sentencing. But before this case went to trial, Elizabeth's mother, Kimberly, went to a hearing for the 5 counts of child abuse and neglect, with one of those being violent. And they set a new date for review in June of 2017, and the defense was arguing that because the evidence wasn't being released by DCF of the children's statements, that they couldn't proceed and that the case should be dismissed. But this was denied, and the defense was told to interview the oldest 3 children because the prosecution planned to call them all to testify. Unfortunately, though, I could find no record of what has since occurred in this case or if she was sentenced at all. But at trial for Tad Cummins in 2019, prosecutors announced that Tad had claimed he had sex with Elizabeth at the school multiple times before his suspension. He had also bought a 2-seater kayak for his plan to escape to Panama when they were traveling. He also bought an iPad so that he could watch the news related to their case. Now, he spoke to the court himself, saying, "As a father and as a parent, to the family of the victim, I'm so sorry. If someone had done this to my girls, I would want to hurt them. I wish I could go back in time. To the victim, I want you to know I agree. This was not your fault. You were a kid. My misguided attempt to help you went sideways. Anything I can do to give you closure, I stand ready." He then apologized to Elizabeth and her family. Elizabeth then spoke up to her captor in this written statement, but then got too emotional to actually say it in court, so the prosecutor read it for her, and it read, "When I started school, you picked me out of the crowd. I was just a kid who wanted to make friends, but you were someone who had a plan. You saw a broken girl who was lonely, scared, and traumatized. You made her feel safe and loved because you saw what she needed and made her believe you would be her protector. If the devil made you do it, then you are the devil. Your choices were yours and yours alone. A 17-year-old girl should not have to tell a 52-year-old man this, but choices have consequences. Your choices destroyed not just my family, but also yours. You act like you care now and that you're full of all of this regret, but where was any of that before? Where was any of that when you first had me alone in your classroom closet and violated me over and over again for months? Where was any of that when you spent untold amounts of time and effort into manipulating, pressuring, and deceiving me into thinking that you were the only person that cared about me? Where was any of that when I told you I was depressed and wanted to see a therapist, but you talked me out of it? Where was any of that when you convinced me to get into the car with you on March 13th, 2017? Where was any of that when you sexually assaulted me night after night? Where was any of that when you made me sleep without my clothes on? Where was any of that when you made the decision to keep me away from my home and my family not once, not twice, but for 38 straight days? All you were was a man who wanted sex, and you manipulated me and used me just for that. But the truth is, no matter how much time you have to serve, you will never be able to undo what you did to me. I will have to live with the scars you left on me forever. You preyed upon a vulnerable girl and robbed her childhood. For the last 2 years, I've been picking myself up piece by piece and proving to myself that I am much, much stronger than you convinced me I was." She also said he chose to be a sexual predator. He chose to prey on me, knowing the problems I had in my home life, and he convinced me that I was weak. He chose to belittle me, degrade me, and abuse me. There is no doubt in my mind that if Mr. Cummins had never been caught, he would have eventually discarded me like a piece of trash and made another impressionable young woman his next chosen victim. Tad Cummins is a sick, disgusting criminal. Elizabeth then requested that her abductor be given 38 years, a year for every day that she was held hostage. However, he was sentenced to 20 years with registration as a sex offender upon release. And in 2020, Elizabeth's family actually sued the Maury County Board of Education on her behalf. This was because they believed that the staff members at the school were aware of this inappropriate relationship long before the suspension actually happened. However, it ended in a settlement that was not an admission of liability, and the family was receiving $650,000 if they would throw out the lawsuit. But that same year, Tad, who was obviously in prison, asked the court to release him early due to COVID-19. However, the judge denied his request. The judge said that his release would not reflect the seriousness of this crime or protect the public from his future crimes. Now, on August 12th of 2022, Elizabeth Thomas's story premiered on Lifetime within the Beyond the Headlines series, and Elizabeth said that putting this film together was actually part of her healing process, and she was able to know that it's no longer happening in her life. She could look back knowing that it made her stronger. She said that she was tired of hiding and living in fear of the community who was bashing her and blaming her. She said that she used to be scared to go to stores or leave her house, and now she walks as if nothing bothers her, and even if it does, she doesn't let people know about it. Now, the woman who produced this movie, Elizabeth Smart, who was a survivor herself, said that this movie does a beautiful job showing the grooming process and how it occurs and how manipulative it is, which is so important. And she believes that someone out there will watch it and say, wait a second, that happened to me, or that's happening to me right now, and it will help other survivors. Elizabeth Smart spoke about how Elizabeth Thomas was one of the loveliest, kindest people you will ever hope to meet, and that people were basically being awful to her, blaming her for what happened, and even with that, she still wanted to make a difference.
I found it in people who have stepped up where they didn't have to. They've showed me the strength, and I struggle every now and again, but it's just that nice little group that you have that's there for you.
Elizabeth Thomas is above and beyond brave and courageous and resilient. As viewers watch the movie, it shows just the tiniest bit of what she experienced. I mean, how can you accurately portray, weeks and months of discriminatory behavior? I mean, you can't. But when you watch that, it does give you just the merest sense of what it was like to be her and to be her even today. And so I just have to say, this woman is incredible.
Elizabeth Thomas said that being able to work with Elizabeth Smart has been so inspiring because she sees the survivor who has come out on the other side of it years later, and she knows that she can be in that same place, and so she looks forward to a life of no fear. But she also says that she hopes that Tad rots and dies in prison, but that she's not scared because she also knows that there's nothing more that he can do to hurt her. After the trial, Elizabeth was saying that all she wanted was family to protect and not let them go down the same road that she did. And a year after the trial, she had actually found her soulmate, and she ended up marrying 18-year-old Skylar in 2019, and they now have a very peaceful life together. But do you think that the school district or the other teachers knew about this inappropriate relationship prior to the suspension? Could the school have done more when they learned about it, or did they do all they could? How many times do you think Tad Cummins has done similar things before? One other girl spoke out. How many more were scared to? I think that this story is so important to spread awareness about because it's so easy for these children, these teens, to fall into this trap when grooming occurs. Let me know if you've watched the movie down below, and let me know if you want me to do the true story of any other movies that you have seen based on true crime stories. So don't forget to speak up, your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay.